Welcome to Audio Products Podcast. We are meeting with pro audio industry veterans, founders, product managers, UX designers, to learn how they build and manage the products we all love. You will get tips how to navigate your career in audio and how to develop a successful audio product, from musical instruments through audio plugins and gaming middleware up to music distribution platforms or consumer electronics like headphones, mics, and even automotive speaker systems. Enjoy.
Hey, Ricky.
Hey, Wojciech. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? How is everything? How is your day going?
It's going pretty well. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I really appreciate that you found time. It's like you're doing so many interesting things that I was looking forward to this conversation, and I'm super pleased that Zach introduced us to each other.
Likewise. Yeah, no, I'm glad I was able to find the time. It seems like you're doing a lot of cool stuff with the Audio Product Academy, so I'm really happy to help out any way I can.
Great. Thank you, man. Listen, so, I don't want to introduce you to the listeners because, like I say, you're just doing so many interesting, things at the same time. So maybe we can just start by, you telling a little bit about what you do and, what's your
Yeah, sure. So for those who are listening, I'm Rithik Kundu, and I wear a variety of different hats, as you may be able to tell from the introduction. So basically, I work in hybrid. I do a hybrid set of work in AI and music when it comes to research and product strategy. So on the side of research, I founded NYU's Generative Audio and AI group, which focuses on, it's an interdisciplinary group which focuses on the intersection between music technology and generative AI alongside other emerging technologies. This led me to start doing product work at a startup where I was helping them, figure out, how to translate research on generative audio into potential MVPs. This work led me to the Joker Deck VC, or Joker Deck Ventures, which is an angel syndicate looking to invest in emerging music technology. So think AI, DSPs, new methods of fan engagement at festivals and concerts. The idea of Joker Deck is that we use smaller check sizes to, empower founders at the pre-seed and seed levels. And that does two things. One, it allows them to build their ideas without burning through cash. And at the second, on the other hand, it allows investors to truly understand what it is that they're getting into. So we seek people who really get it, whether that's, exited founders in music tech or former artists, producers, and even just music industry executives that want to put their money into something new. We go far and wide with both the founders and investors believing that the Joker should be a wild card in any deck, that's able to assume any role. And so we seek that out in the people that we work with. Lastly,
Ricky, so just a question. So is this VC or more like a business angel type of, like a collective of because you mentioned founders and entrepreneurs, former executives.
So it's a bit of both. So it initially started as what we would call an angel investor syndicate, basically a network of both founders, operators, and investors. So, all of them combined alongside others that, want to get involved in some way or form as connectors that, are able to put their capital or their time into a startup. But on the other hand, we're also, I can't say too much about this part, but we are building a fund of our own in order to basically put some dry powder on those funds that we want to contribute to.
That's cool. I strongly believe that we need more industry veterans or people who love music to fund music projects. That's my super strong belief, because there is so many institutions right now in the industry that has nothing to do with, and they don't give a damn about musicians and anything. So this kind of initiatives are so cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
But listen, I mean, I just interrupted you, and I mean, if you can, and I know that you wanted to say a little bit more. So
sure.
Well,
the thing you just said, that's the mentality that we look for in the people that we work with. People who really understand, that music is it's different than traditional VC. You can't support it in the way that you could other things. And not only that, but, with all of these new technologies rising to potentially replace artists, it is so important to be able to find the people who care about preserving what really matters on the side of human artistry and creativity. And also, just engagement between people. So, to your point, to sort of go off on the tangent here, those are the type of people that we really like to see in our network. The people who really get it. And that sort of leads me to my third thing and the sort of hybrid world of hats that I wear, which is, I don't know if your viewers can see the headline that I wrote in the streaming thing, but if they cannot, the third thing is I serve as an advisor for a few different organizations and companies that are looking to tap into the AI music scene, whether it's through strategy or product, because of the previous work that I've done in research and on the side of VC and looking at potential investments from a product perspective. So I can't say too much about all of the companies that I am advising. I can say that the ones that I advise are very strongly on the side of helping musicians rather than simply building an AI product. And those are the types of people that I really mesh with, because I started out in this field as a producer myself, making hip hop beats in Ableton. So when I go to do all these things, when I go to do research, for example, one of the projects that I'm doing is with a Grammy winner called The Future of Music Production Is AI Taking Over? It's a blind test between AI-generated and human-made music. And I'm conducting that from the perspective of a producer to see, as listeners, why might we prefer AI music or why might we prefer human-made music? And, this is the way in which I conduct all of the work that I do, because I strongly believe that, musicians need to have a voice in this changing industry. And for better or for worse, I want to make sure that I can serve the needs as best as I can of those people who may not have a voice.
Cool. Ricky, I have a question regarding, of course, I have plenty of questions. I want to pick your brain, knowing how deeply you are into AI stuff. But before we did that, you told me about this research earlier, and I was just wondering, because the AI stuff, it changes, so rapidly right now. So is this really whatever actually you find today, maybe in a month or so, the models are being, developed so quickly, a year ago, everybody could say, oh, this is, AI music, generated music. Right now, in many cases, you you listen and say, wow. Or even if this is just not a fully generated, Suno, Udio, whatever, but there are some tools that can, I don't remember right now what the tool is, but Dr. Mix on his channel was representing that he played actually something on the keyboard, and it's just generated, all the other instruments and creating arrangement. And I say, wow. But there was some really amazing chord progressions and some, jazzy style. And I wouldn't think I can do something like this. So it's just progressing so quickly. So is this, I'm not trying to sort of say that this research doesn't have doesn't make sense, but how do you tackle the thing that, whatever you research today, in a month can be really outdated?
No, that's a very fair question. And so, I think we should first start by approaching it from the side of technical research. On the side of technical research, most of the music generation that we see today likely stems from a paper from Meta that dated back to 2023 called Music Gen. It basically was the first that allowed for text-to-music generation in a broad sense, allowing for, future products to be developed. So many of us in the research world believe that this is the likely reason that products like Suno and Udio are able to exist. And the reason I want to start there is because they've been developing that research, whether it's Music Gen or another paper or, their own proprietary research, and developing it into their own models. And they're going to continue doing so. So from that perspective, I don't think it's a good idea to evaluate it from the technical perspective, because you're right that things are always going to continue changing and improving. Rather, we need to adapt to that and, put that into our conviction when it comes to research. So the way that I'm approaching this is rather than a technical perspective, from an artistic generalist perspective. So let's think about it this way. If you are an artist, who's your customer? They're going to be listeners, right? Listeners and people that go to your concerts, that buy your albums, if, they're able to on the physical side, or they're streaming it, right? At the end of the day, you need listeners in order to keep the market alive. So I'm evaluating these songs based on the same metrics in which you might evaluate a real song, or rather not necessarily a real song, but a human-made song. And those would be from songwriting metrics. So, for example, do you like the lyrics of the AI song or the human song more? Do you like the vocal performance? Stuff along those lines. Subjective metrics that aren't going to change no matter how much the AI models will improve. Because at the end of the day, if you're making songs, those are still the metrics in which you're going to evaluate things. I don't think that there's going to be, a layman who decides they want to evaluate things based on the quality of a generation. They're not going to think about the technical depth in which an audio file was generated from a Suno, an Udio, or an 11 Labs. They're going to think about, do they resonate with the song themselves? Do they find themselves, enjoying the rhythm? Do they find themselves feeling like the song taps into their feelings emotionally, or helps them discover something about themselves that they didn't know before? The things that I should probably stop saying actual music, but human-made music is able to do on a day-to-day basis. If AI music can do the same, then we need to know that. And in this way, we evaluate it on the same level as we are evaluating human art. Because if you think about it, technology has allowed for a lot of advancement in music. If you think about DAWs, if you think about the fact of how are we recording this podcast right now? We're recording it remotely through audio interfaces on StreamYard. And, would that be possible 40 years ago? Probably not. You'd have to be in the studio, and you'd have to probably do it via analog tape deck.
You come to New York to yourself, exactly, right? And sit down and spend much time and money. Absolutely, that's true.
So, I think that the reason that I'm conducting the research this way overall is, for one, evaluating it based on artistic metrics allows for a continual methodology as these technologies improve, something that we can come back to. And that's what I hope to do, create an anchor in which people can come back to AI-generated music or human-made music and say, okay, based on these results, what does this mean? Based on the results of this test in its current state, what does it mean? And at the same time, we should remember that technology is a tool meant to assist us. In the way that we are recording a podcast right now, the same way someone could be making music that really resonates with someone, and we need to understand the full effect of that.
So tell me, so what's actually, can you already say what comes out of the research so far? So what's the, are there any already findings?
Currently, while we're in the data collection process, we've seen that, there are certain genres that, Suno is able to make better than human-made production. But at the same time, there are a lot of niche genres that Suno simply cannot understand as well. And this is because, similar to the way that the music industry functions, they function based on what sells the most, right? And what would that be? Most likely Western pop, right? And we can go a little deeper into that. But so far, I'm assuming that you're following my line of thought, right? Okay. So if Western pop is, and other genres around that, in that area are the most popular and perform the best, what do you think that AI models, and AI companies want to train their models on? They want to train on what is most successful commercially. So what that means is when you have commercially successful genres, you're going to see iterations of commercially successful artists. So, like for some of the work that I've done, I've seen stuff that emulates like Sabrina Carpenter's voice, even though you can't prove it outright. If you listen to her stuff, you can hear the similarities and the almost uncanny valley in what is being generated. Of course, there's more technology that goes into proving that, like attribution and other aspects on that line. But that's not what we're trying to prove. We're trying to see what allows people to resonate with AI-generated music if they do.
Interesting. Well, I mean, on the other hand, when you say about what resonates with people, ultimately what comes to my mind is the quote by Rick Rubin, who says, well, as soon as you start thinking about the, music as a product and thinking what people will listen to, it's no longer music, it's already a product, which is, it is not an art, it is already like something else, I mean, I'm
Absolutely.
strongly, agree with this thing. I mean, people, I think, especially in tech, outside music industry, forget about it completely, right? This is not just products, and these are not customers, but this is, something that you want to deeply sort of, communicate what you feel, right? Rather than and then from that perspective, I think also we cannot take the labels out of the picture. That well, I mean, on the other hand, yes, the labels know very well who else. So they obviously push music that they think that people will listen to. So, but I just wonder, I mean, also Rick Beato once mentioned he was actually, I'm not sure who was the guest, but he was telling the story about why when it was specifically about rock music that he's so much into, but he was telling the story how the music sort of, so, I mean, there was something about the radio bill in US that sort of, make a huge concentration of radio stations in US and somehow, create kill the diversity because there were so many guys who in the radios who were just playing different music, and obviously that created different genres. And right now, I'm just trying to say that between the customer or the end user or a listener and the artist, there is entire middleman, labels and, entire industry, and we cannot simply completely take it out of the picture, don't we? Right? Because they shape what people actually listen to, and sometimes maybe even, some things that could resonate with people are simply not heard because it's not being sort of pushed by the, by big players. Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Even before AI music came into the fold, labels, as you say, they do have a lot of influence over what we listen to and what we consume in terms of, their ability. They have a large ability to market, to book artists for shows, to be able to place, their top performing artists in places that we're just going to know and recognize. And it goes not just into, concerts and merchandise, but also, on billboards, in New York City, for example. It goes into brand partnerships that goes as deep as, commercials and other tiny small niches that may seem insignificant, but they actually build up a lot of credibility for a consumer. And so, that was pre-AI to the point where, let's take it back to 2023. I was doing some work in A&R at that point, and because there was so much content being made, I was told that, we can't scout anybody that has under 50K listeners and under 50K followers on Instagram or TikTok, because otherwise that's seen as just noise. And, especially when you're looking at that many people that just happen to exist and they're all trying to make a living, how do you figure out who is worth giving the deal to? I mean, it's almost impossible. It's almost an impossible science. And, kind of like what you're saying, we shouldn't be evaluating music as a product, but in many cases, it is evaluated as a product. And so, now we need to be watching the labels more closely than ever. For those who are listening who may not be aware, the record labels UMG, Warner, and Sony had sued Suno and Udio in separate cases back in 2024, and this was for copyright infringement on the account that these AI generators had ripped off some of their IP, aka they'd copied some of their songs verbatim. If you look at the report musicologically, they seem to prove that, at least at the time, Suno and Udio both copied, songs that were in the respective catalogs of these labels almost verbatim. And, this lawsuit had gone on for about a year and a half. And by the end of last year, what happened was that two of these labels partnered with the companies.
Like Spotify, or like they did with and everybody's just doing great except for artists as usual. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, UMG partnered with Udio and Warner partnered with Suno. And there are some nuances between those deals. But what happened after that was that UMG and Warner both partnered with Stability AI. UMG also partnered with NVIDIA and Splice. And at the same time, they're looking to build out more initiatives around AI. At the same time, Spotify started their AI, I think it's called the Artist First AI Music Lab. I've known about this since September, and that is still a mouthful. And, at the same time, we see partnerships that are happening between, rights holders and AI companies, whether they're generative, like prompt generators like Suno and Udio, or they're more assistive technologies. The point that, the main point that I'm trying to get at, that I've been seeing both, in the news, and also I've just been very aware of, having sat on panels with a ton of heavy hitters, is that everybody is trying to get ahead of each other in this sort of arms race when it comes to AI and music. And so, like you said before, where are artists in this situation? That's what I always want to question. So, at all of these decisions that I just mentioned, I want to point out that artists oftentimes were not included in the table. Most of the time, we see artists speaking out against AI. And, that's not to say that all are against AI and all are for it. You have some nuances like Timbaland, who's pro AI, and, at the same time, you have
Jordan Rudess. He was actually on the previous episode of the podcast, and he's working a lot, right, with MIT Media Lab, and this is actually, I'm not sure if you saw this video, right, of his, he's building his own models with MIT. That's pretty cool, like sort of like a playing with him. And he also but he acknowledges the fact that, it obviously is a double-edged sword, so it's obviously like so cool and fun. On the other hand, there is some controversy. But it was actually pretty interesting having like artists actually speaking, because like you say, there are so many discussions, and very often people speaking on behalf of artists rather. But where are the artists on the table, right? Who is speaking? I just hate to speak on somebody's behalf, right? At least when I say I can speak my own opinion, not just But yeah, sorry.
No. I totally get your point. And, I was going to say, at the same time, there are AI companies that speak out against the practices that are being conducted by some. So like a good example that I often like to cite is Lemonade, which recently got acquired by BeatStars. So Lemonade is a generative MIDI platform that specializes in hip hop melodies that they sourced from producers that they had contracts with. And so they basically branded themselves as an ethical generator because they made sure that revenue went to the producers that they turned their, melodies into data from. So everyone was able to get a piece of the pie. Consumers or producers were able to get their hands on, their favorite producers' tracks. And at the same time, producers were able to get a piece of the pie. And, they've largely spoken out against unethical practices. So this is what I mean when I say the landscape is more nuanced than, like every AI company is bad and every artist is against it. There's more nuances that we need to understand, and, middle grounds that we need to understand.
Absolutely. It's never like right, never, ever. But Ricky, if I can, take advantage, like I mentioned, I'm just dying to ask you questions more about, sort of into AI rather than just like a market and philosophy, because like you mentioned, you founded an NYU, this GenAudio and AI, and you are also like involved in research, so I'm just wondering, if what's your opinion about the educational programs right in music tech right now? So do they, how to say, are they like AI native already? Are they, like up to date, to teach people, the new stuff, or they are still like lagging behind, a little bit? What's your perspective?
I think it's a mixed bag. It really depends on what program you're looking at, what school you're looking at, and, a few other factors that are outlying based on, just on a case-by-case basis. But what I can say is for the music tech program at NYU, we did have a couple of AI courses, around the subject. One that I really liked was Music, the Mind, and AI, taught by Dr. Mary Farbood. That's one of my favorite classes that I've taken at the school. And I went into the research side around artificial intelligence. And, we had some deep learning classes and programming classes, but I also probably should point out that, even though we had those, it did not feel as if we were AI native enough. And it wasn't just for myself, but also for the other members who joined the GenAudio and AI group. I think part of the reason that the group ended up being so successful was because there were a lot of people that wanted to understand how to navigate this field. And because it's so new, it wasn't possible for, our program to adapt to become AI native. And that's not to say that it won't. I believe that it will given time. But I think that for the moment, that time, we're still in the sort of in-between phase. So I would say that, at least on the side of education, there's still a bit of work that we need to do. A lot of the time it's, a lot of the time education, at least in this program, is not entirely acknowledging the new developments that have occurred. And I don't think that's any fault on educators' parts.
Well,
I think it is simply... It's simply because it's new. So, like one example of this is, and then there are some educators that are taking more initiative on this. So for example, I think the Berklee College of Music is a great sort of case study on quick adaptation. So Professor Ben Camp, who I was on a panel with back in September, he started an AI songwriting course to basically teach people how to use generative models to write their own songs as a method of staying up to date and, being adaptive in the current time. And he started that, I think, as early as fall of 24. I wouldn't completely quote me on that, but I'm 90% sure that was the case. Now, that being said, that led to a few other courses. A good friend of mine, Drew Thurlow, recently started a music and AI course around, I believe it was like the business practices of the field. And he's teaching that with another friend of mine. I think she started as a guest speaker, and he's brought in a lot of heavy hitters from the music industry. And I believe that he's teaching a similar class in NYU's music business program in the coming year. So that is, and the reason I bring this up is because, similarly to the way I was describing my research and the way that the current scene is, it really is nuanced. I think that there's a lot of adaptation work that is going on, and some programs are going quicker than others, but that's not to say that everyone will catch up. However, I will say that, it is very important to stay vigilant and up to date with everything that's going on, because if you don't, and you don't at least attempt to determine what coursework should be adapted to the current time, then things will fall behind. And I would really hate to see that happen, because there are, at least in the side of GenAudio, I've seen a lot of members with a lot of potential to enter the field, not just as technical engineers or, artists in residence, but also, working on the side of product, on the side of advocacy, on the side of, making it clear what exactly is going on and, establishing deals that really benefit everybody. And I'm a firm believer that everyone should be included in this conversation. And if we don't adapt our curricula to be able to adapt to that, then we're doing everyone a disservice.
Yep. That the academy is mostly about building audio products, so I'm super curious about your experience also with startups. And yeah, I can see like a huge, everybody uses machine learning products, for such a long time. There is not a controversy. I mean, nobody can live without RX in post-production, and, mixing and mastering is just always it's a basic suite for anyone. And there are so many great products already that have no controversy. But on the other hand, there is very little information except for the researchers like yourself, who actually acquire some magical knowledge in the universities and doing some research. And then they just transfer it, like ROX, for example, and Lander and, others. Yeah. But the other, for the others, for the normal people, obviously AI is just like some kind of, you never know actually whether, to apply AI or not. Maybe, a normal DSP is, enough. How to build those pipelines, actually, what models to choose, etc. So there is and I actually also explore quite a lot a productivity side of, LLMs and how product manager can, or a founder can become more productive. But I mean, when it comes to building a product that has an AI as a solution or some kind of enabling technology, there is still so much to say. So I'm just curious, and I would like to, if I can explore the subject with you a little bit by maybe asking a little bit, so what would you so what if if you would advise me, I mean, I know a little bit more maybe than others still, but you would like to advise somebody who is a, product person in audio and has no a knowledge whatsoever, how they, how he would like or she would like to learn, and somehow include AI into their, a product development, what would you suggest? So what kind of, things they should learn, and, what's a basic stack they need to master in order to become, except for hiring yourself, right?
I believe that this should be a case-by-case basis based on the skill sets that the product person has. So, for example, if it's about making MVPs and it's a software company, if it's a software company, as most audio products can be, or at least half of them, the other half being hardware. I think on the side of software, there's a few different sort of elements of the stack to follow. One of them being learning AI coding based tools. If you're not already fluent in something like Juice or C++ or Python. And the reason to get involved with those is to be able to make proofs of concept that engineers can actually take to market. Because at the end of the day, engineers, at least in my experience, are very good at refining and solving problems. But sometimes they're not always going to be able to identify the problems at hand. Usually product people are going to be the ones to figure that out more often than not. So
that's their role. That's their a basic role, to find the problems.
Exactly, yes. And so we need to ensure that, as product people, we actually have the tools to be able to work on this. So, one thing, for example, is iterating stuff through engines like Cursor, Claude Code, or even Lovable to be able to, show developers, hey, this is what we want the product to look like. This is how it should sound. And taking not just these engines, but also looking at research that we may not be able to develop ourselves. So for example, if you're making a music gen engine, use MusicGen's GitHub repo, put it into Cursor, and then build an MVP that you can output to something like Vercel, or another one of these domain-based, another one of these GitHub hosting sites that is able to host a repo that has been created from nothing. And of course, it's always better if there's a little bit of coding experience involved. However, in this way, this is one element of the stack where I think if you're able to show these MVPs to the rest of the company, then this is a way to say hey, these are different proofs of concept of how we'd want the thing to look like, what makes sense. And in this way, it's not just a Figma board anymore. This is something that an engineer can actually draw from and build up from the ground up. Now, of course, this could go, deeper or more on the service level, depending on what's at hand. So let's say that it's a hardware thing. Perhaps then, it's a matter of making sure that if you're going into, let me think of it this way. Consider it this way. If you're going into, building something new on the side of hardware, then there's probably going to be more research that needs to be done. Same with software, of course, on the side of market research and seeing what things actually work. But this
Ricky,
would be
my question was a little bit different, because I mean, let's I mean, honestly, I don't think of like learning how to code at all. I'm just like thinking creating pipelines. So do I need to how actually shall I know whether actually to apply AI or not, right? I mean, it's like when I just try to study, I just realized that in certain cases some things can be done by the traditional like a DSP, right? Or it doesn't have to be really an AI product, so how not to fall into the trap really of I have a problem already, right? Identify, I know what I would like to do, but then actually how to actually make a decision, what kind of technology to choose, or whether this should be like some local model, or shall I use some like open source libraries, etc. There is so much with
I understand. Okay.
And I started to study and read, and I see transformers and diffusion models and traditional networks, right? So then I say, oh gee, that's actually, I mean, architectural decisions, but I mean they obviously have certain influence on the product, because if I just make I can obviously build like a small probably MVP with some open source libraries or like existing available like models, but I mean if this is if it's supposed to be like a profitable product in the later, so the question is actually,
I understand. Yes,
technology chosen is already like a showstopper, because it means that we'll be training some big models, and without like a VC there is no point actually of even getting into this. So what I'm trying to say is I'm building business model canvas. I'm just trying to understand. So what would you advise?
I believe and your question. So this really, again, is a case-by-case basis type of question. I think the first thing that as a product person you should try to answer is, do you need AI in the product? Do you need AI to, and how and to what degree, right? So how to
do this, right? How to make this decision? How this person could do this?
I think that, this would start with doing some research on, other solutions that have existed in the past. So for example, if you're building a VST that's, let's say an EQ, right? That's supposed to be like a next gen version of FabFilter, let's say, right? Rather than going into building a new model and, burning that money on, a team and burning it on a new model first, it's important to see, what's been done previously and also in open source. What research can you take from already and say, hey, this is the way it's been done before. We should build off of this. Or this has never been done before, so we need to spend time and energy in research. So if it's the first, if there's, previous progress that shows, hey, this is something we can build off of, and then perhaps we can integrate AI later into, part of the workflow, then that's one way to approach it. And arguably that's the more sustainable way to approach this, because, building a new model costs time, it costs team members, it costs, energy, not just on the side of the team itself, but also GPU load, etc. Right? So the first question should be, how do we build the product without relying on AI? And the reason I think about this is because AI is at its core supposed to be an assistive tool. If you center a product around AI, then the question really becomes, what is the value proposition? How will it adapt to the next emerging technology after AI, right? So in this case, if we're thinking about something like where you're building like a next gen VST, if it doesn't require AI to get started, and to build an MVP, but perhaps, you would want to include a model later on, then the most important thing to consider is here is how you're going to start out building that, and then incorporating it later is sort of the VC speak, so to speak. If they know that it's going to be included at some point, even in some small capacity, it's a method of reassurance. But a lot of the time they want to make sure that the solutions can stand on their own without, going into something that could break because it's very expensive research. Now, if it's something that has never been done before, then it hinges on using open source models, training them, and building something from the ground up. But this is a decision that should be made before building something. And this is something that I often advise when I'm working with clients. Obviously, all of them want to be involved in the AI space because, like I said before, it's sort of like an arms race. It's something where, people will get left behind if they don't show that they are ahead. But there are many ways in which to show that you're ahead.
I got it. But I mean, we discussed before we actually met to record the podcast that I was actually building, way before the AI hype, when I was actually involved as a head of product and building like a machine learning product. And my major challenge was actually that I was working with the engineering lead, and I didn't want to, the person that I completely rely on in terms of let's say technological decision, architectural decisions. But to me, it was always since I'm not an engineer, it was hard for me to say, okay, so we've been doing some research and at certain points I was wondering, is it already, we couldn't get the results we wanted. So the question is this some, we should look for another algorithm and actually try to, or maybe do some assistive, I don't know how to call it,
assistive technology,
I don't know. There was this, the approach, how we train. So it's just more I don't know actually the proper, even you see a language for it, but we try to discover patterns by so push so much data through the specific algorithm, so it actually discovers certain patterns in users' behavior, and we couldn't get to the point of so much noise that we couldn't actually get to the how to say satisfying results. So then there was a question, maybe we can do more try to label the data to see, sit and train it by, simply reviewing the output and sort of, specific consultants just throwing, reviewing the, and this could, but I wasn't actually, knowledgeable enough actually to say this, is this not enough data, or maybe it just need to work a little bit more, or we have to just completely change the approach. So I was just looking for, I didn't want to learn code, but I wanted to say, okay, so, what are the, let's say, type of models or types of, algorithm? What are the just a generic purpose? And, what are their sort of pros and cons from more a business perspective? So I can be a great partner for an engineering person, not by, knowing how to code. I know a little bit.
Yeah, no, of course.
That's kind of,
okay. Sorry again for not, I didn't completely get it the first time. To think about it this way, on the side of analysis, that's what you're asking about, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also making some kind of business decision, so milestones, how to sort of navigate the entire project, right? To say what is the moment, we have to change the, or you mentioned a change, whether the AI is actually necessary at all, right? But without even knowing what to look for, it's just a little bit sometimes tricky. And I just started to read, ask GPT to tell me a little bit about it. He says, build a pipeline, for example, right? So it was a term I heard for the first time, right? And I say, oh, so it's just a pipeline. I need to make an entire a process, what will be the data, how will be, sort of analyzed, what will be output, etc. So I guess for AI researchers, it's just such a basic thing. I assume that when I talk to engineers, sometimes I think they don't even know they have to, sort of explain it to a business guy because, but there is not a lot of information. You either get very technical and, I wanted to base some fundamentals of machine learning, and instead of getting this kind of high level view, I got a book of, a Python, and I said,
yes,
no. I think with GPT or generally LLMs becomes a little bit easier because I can, I make it into a learning mode, and it just, guides me slowly explaining, the difference between transformers, diffusion models, and how to create the strategy, which means what data available, what pipeline, etc. So slow this kind of stuff I'm looking for. What kind of, what would you maybe advise to funders to, what they should at least know, the basic knowledge they should have in order to, to be a good partner for a person like yourself?
Well, okay. Think of I think that the way to approach this is to think of a GPT model not necessarily as the engine where you're going to accomplish everything, because it can't do that. It's simply not capable of accomplishing everything that we need to do all at once. Rather, it's going to be an assistant in workflows that we've already developed. So, when I work with other people, I say, it's important to be able to translate the metrics that you're looking for from engineering speak in layman's terms or vice versa. This is something, it's relatively simple, but it's something that a GPT model can really help out with, especially when it's fed data that you are giving it based on, like product metrics and A/B testing, what have you. Now, from there, the next step is not necessarily having it come up with, you shouldn't be following recommendations only from a model, of course. It's a partner and a co-pilot in what you're doing. Same as when you're making music. This is the same philosophy that I have with this, but in terms of building a product or, managing, it's a matter of figuring out, okay, like these are different roadmaps we can take because of how complex the data is. And, you have to decide for yourself based on seeing these things, like interact with it and say like, okay, what does it mean? What would it look like if we've hit like X metric? And what action should we take if we've hit that metric and KPI? And, it should be sort of a working relationship to determine, okay, like when have we hit a point that we should be taking action and when have we not? So far, I hope I'm answering what you're asking.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm just like super hungry, for knowledge.
Yeah, of course.
I just wonder, like the terms like I mean, this is also like when I was preparing to this podcast, I just like found the term that I never actually knew or heard of, which is the guardrails, right? So, so some kind of way somehow, so, see, this is something super interesting because, and I assume that there still is a gap between like AI engineers and, general sort of like so I mean, I'm just trying to say that, I mean, I think I studied this quite a lot. I use AI quite a lot. I even did some machine learning, product in the past. But since there is like a little like a business acumen, in terms of like a, even like a language that you communicate with, right? So like I mentioned, like words like pipeline, guardrails, and so it's very hard actually to to even communicate efficiently, right, with other people, because it's such a new domain, right? I mean, if you talk about the classic like engineering, even I know that there is not so many people after all who actually does like a DSP very well anymore. But what I'm trying to say, there's at least like a traditional software engineering is like a very, how to say, it's well defined. It's a lot of terms, so you can, like communicate efficiently with people, right? And when with AI, and AI sometimes even like talk to AI and say but I mean, that's I'm still like a like a little bit curious. What else, or like a question like how. What I'm trying to say is actually, is the data I have enough, to build, like to use AI product or not, right? So how can I make an assessment? Are you saying that also to talk to like a GPT that would be enough? I'm just like trying to imagine myself that I get like some kind of some idea, I have some problem and I have some data, and how can I, so like if imagine that you come to me and we're just starting work together, what kind of questions would you ask, right? Or like what would you sort of like what kind of, is there like a checklist that you can do in order to say, okay, that's not case for AI, or maybe this is what we need to, decisions we need to make, or like collect more data, or the data is not good enough, not the highest quality, stuff like this.
Well, I think you hit a lot of the nails on the head. The first is the quality of data. That's very important. But quality must also intersect with quantity here, which I mean is like, it's true for pretty much anything in the business world, but especially true when training AI models. So if you're thinking about, the pipeline and the guardrails thing, so pipeline is, it's basically like a long-term method of taking whatever you find on, side A, which is like A/B test results, different things that you're already collecting, and then feeding that into a model to be able to have it produce a conclusion. This is the same way in which, music learning would work. Music Gen takes in audio data and then outputs something because it's learned from it. So if you think of it in this way, there are certain guardrails you may want to put on it, like, there's certain conclusions that, we can't, like take action with, for example, right? Like, or there's too little to be able to draw a conclusion. You have to establish, what does that mean when utilizing an agentic workflow or a model to be able to determine what makes the most sense. Now, I'm going to try to go into layman's terms on this, but basically when working with someone, I typically start with asking them, what exactly is it that they're building, and what, and how many customers they have? Because I think that this is such an important thing, and it's like, a lot of people believe that by implementing AI into their workflows, it's going to increase their customer base. It's going to increase, their ability to attract more people. But that's not necessarily true. It may be true with investors, but, implementing AI into a workflow simply isn't enough. You must be intentional with it. So, for example, after I hear the answers to this, the question I'd ask is, why do you want to implement AI? Right. And if it's just to be ahead with the times, okay, I feel like that's not necessarily enough. I need to understand, like what exactly do they want to accomplish with it? Is it that, they want to be able to iterate on feedback faster? That would be, a valid reason to use it, right? If you're able to process product data faster and be like, okay, we need to take this action more decisively, let's go on that line. That is a good reason to use it. It's not just, we want to use AI for the heck of it. That wouldn't be a good reason, right? So it's about being intentional. And this is something that I look for in, the companies and organizations that I advise. Why do they want to get involved with AI?
And I mean, is AI used from your perspective? So if you talk to, many people talk to you, so what's your opinion? Is it widely overused? I mean, are many people following the hype and just, trying to implement AI without actually having a good case for it? Or this is not so much anymore?
Many people are, and I honestly can say that I don't blame them necessarily. Let's think about it this way. If you're a startup that's trying to, build a product and take it to market, a lot of the time, your head is going to be down building that product. It's not necessarily going to, the company, the team at the size that it is in a pre-seed stage isn't necessarily going to always be able to think about, all the outlying factors, they're not always going to be able to respond to feedback in real time as quickly as, say, a larger company may, because they have the manpower to do it. So in that case, there is a necessity for having assistive technology be able to, help speed things along, so to speak. But a lot of the time, people function in groupthink, right? So if you see one founder using a bunch of AI tools, a lot of the time other founders might be like, oh, this is the right thing to do. They'll hop on the hype train without having a clear methodology on what to do. And that is where things go awry.
Absolutely. And I mean, so many people are afraid to actually acknowledge that they have no clue what they talk about. And I can see this a lot. Like, so many people, I mean, everybody is an expert, but I mean, if you ask questions, I sometimes ask super stupid questions and people just, oh, that's it's like a neural network. Is it like a physical thing, or this is just like a virtual? And, like a friend of mine, oh, no, are you asking this question? Yeah. I say, well, I'm just trying to understand. Everybody will talk about neural network. I mean, I understand the idea and the concept, but I mean, is it just like a physical, I don't know, some kind of, blades connected somehow? Then I just learn, okay, that's a virtual, so it's a, so it's like a software that emulates this communication as like a neurons. Then, different models. then I just like, like it was so funny that obviously everybody use this, with using AI, we know what those guardrails are. So for example, in StreamYard, you can cut the shorts later and, with some interesting pieces, but obviously it doesn't, it makes you suggestions, obviously based on certain probability. He finds, some interesting stories for you and make a proposal, and then you can have a selection and, also like a slide a little bit more and less. Then I say, oh, that's interesting. Funny, thing is that I just learned that because of it, I mean, the UX and UI designers actually, will not be replaced, but at least not for the time being by AI, because they are so important, and actually implementing, interesting like a UX and kind of like a smart guardrails into the processor. So important, right? Which is also like a super interesting discovery for me. But the funny thing is, you see, I mean, nobody teaches this and nobody talks about those terms and how you build this. So when I actually prompted GPT and tried to like a deep, spent entire day just like a prompting and asking questions as a product manager, then I say, oh, that's interesting. Huh? That's there's so many things there that we talked about.
And this is pretty much what I was trying to get at before, when I mentioned, using certain workflows to be able to generate MVPs. This is something that, you would need the feedback, you need the eyes of a UI UX person and the mind of them, in their mind to be able to say like, okay, this is something that's going to be good for the customer. This is something that's going to be good for, other constituents versus not. And, this is in looking at it this way, it's basically, the question of like, are you just on AI for the hype train, or are you on it because there's an actual problem to be solved? And this is something that, you constantly need to ask as a product person. It's important to be as specific as possible when answering these questions, like at least this is what I encourage the people I work with to do. Think about things as if, you're in the field of education, right? Or in the field of research, what is the question that you're actually trying to answer? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And if you don't have a specific answer, then that is another issue within itself. And I think that you and I both understand that. It's like you said with product, you need the eyes of UI UX designers to be able to place the guardrails on this. You need feedback. You need human feedback. You need humans in the loop, so to speak, in order to determine what actually makes sense and what doesn't. There was a study that came out a couple of days ago that a company, I forgot which one, was using only AI data to make company decisions. And that data was false. It's crazy, right? I don't remember which company. And, unfortunately for the sake of this episode, but what I can say is that is, in my opinion, an example of when you're following AI just for the hype train, rather than using these models and these agents as a method of solving a specific problem. The question
sorry, Rick, but I believe that it's, now that I learned the concept of guardrail, now when I look at the, the most typical model, applications like a ChatGPT or Gemini, etc., I think they don't have actually good enough guardrails, and they obviously the output from those LLMs is so, realistic that can really be, they can just lie like human can, right? They can just, so yeah. Now, honestly, I'm just sorry that I'm nailing the screw on this subject, but I just got so excited.
No, don't apologize. I love getting into this. So
yeah, so it just, I get so excited about this because now I think about every AI through the, sort of concept of the guardrails. And I say, how actually, what is the, human in the loop? Is there any, maybe information how, so first thing, what I'm trying to say is that, I just what I learned that it's actually AI is about probability versus, it's not like 100%. So, even DSP, you can take a signal and you know exactly what will happen. So then when I actually got this information, so first of all, it's all about probability. So Now the question is, how reliable the output is, and maybe this can be some KPIs. So model can tell you, okay, so this is at least, this is what I think the truth is. This, not just, it's just like with humans. Sometimes when I argue with some, let's say you have a, argument with your wife and say, you don't say, this is the truth. You only say, I believe this is the truth. And this completely changes the conversation. You know what I mean?
It's about perception.
Yeah, it's about perception. That's my opinion. I'm not 100% sure this is true. And I think the same, the guardrails in the models should be like incorporated, but I'm not sure if this is not done because they don't care, which can happen with large corporations, or maybe they don't understand the implications, what can happen when people take the output of a model and they, they take it as a ultimate true. But everybody can, I'm guilty of it too, right? You read stuff on the internet, it's so crazy.
And it's easy to consume, I think that, okay, so to go off of that point, I think that we should consider these models. You're absolutely right that, there are a lot of guardrails that need to be implemented. And I believe that there are a few reasons why they're not. One is that because these are large corporations, they take in a large influx of data, which means that they will output certain things that are just, based off of like what is perceived to be the majority opinion of a matter, even if it's not necessarily true. So yeah, on that front, there needs to be fact checkers. But on the other hand, these models are consumer products. And, let's just think about this. What's the point? What makes a product great? If you keep using it, right? And so in the case of an AI model like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, how does that translate? It's if you keep using the model. If you keep using the model and telling your friends about it and, getting people to continue using it. And, I want to point out how many, I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl in the US a couple weeks ago, I think like 2 weeks ago now.
I heard, there was actually such a big noise about it. Yeah, I heard I just watched quite a lot of like a US TV and, like a night show. So, so I heard it and I watched it. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing it up is not to talk about Bad Bunny or, any of the major political statements that were being made. I personally think that his performance was awesome, and I feel like that should be said on the record. But I actually wanted to point out how many ads were made by OpenAI, Claude, and Gemini. I think there were like 5 or 6 across the entire game. Which, wow. Let's think about this. Super Bowl is one of the most viewed events per year, like every year. In American television, and they're trying to expand internationally. And so, a big part of that is they need money from, sponsors. And if you look at what these companies are doing, if you look at OpenAI, Claude, Anthropic, and Google, they're all trying to ensure that people continue to use their products by any means necessary.
Yeah, that's the problem known. The same like with Facebook. It's other time people complain the dark patterns, and they, there's always like the compromise. How can you keep users actually using it, and keep the retention high, and on the other hand, how not to like implement dark patterns, so how that's a and sort of the meta is obviously controversial for this reason, right? Because people know that they, at some point they don't give a damn actually.
Of course. Yeah. Now, because they're large corporations, I'm not necessarily going to say it's within their nature to do this, but think of it this way. If you're building a product, you're going to follow methods that are going to keep users on the product. That's simply the nature of how, that's simply the nature of like how many people, especially in America, want to retain consumers and, users of their products. What that means,
going in a very controversial. Sorry, finish. Just you touched a very sensitive point, but
yeah. What that means, though, and kind of like what I believe you're getting into, because it's so controversial, it's important to have, consumers and just other voices holding these companies accountable. simply because the way I think about this is that if there's a large enough populace that's saying, hey, this isn't okay, we need to implement guardrails, that is I believe that's one of the most effective ways to get companies to listen to developments, right? In the same way that in the research that I'm conducting, listeners are the catalyst. In the same way, if we do think about AI as a product rather than an art form, it still functions largely the same way. If customers have an issue with it and they present that and they say like, hey, we've been using this, there needs to be more work done in order for us to keep using this. I think that's a very effective way to say, hey, we need to build guardrails and this has to happen.
But you know what? I mean, I think it's also nice. I know that we're slowly getting to an end. I mean, it just goes into really this reflection that I think that's why audio and music industry is so cool, because and then I know a lot of people who came to this podcast actually share this. And when I talk to people also like in some events, people say that's cool that, you don't have to. So like, unlike other industries, people are here for some, with passion, and they are not like how to say, in the wider tech, like a Silicon Valley type companies, there is like this pressure of, for growth, and, you can only get money because you promise to build unicorns. And actually in the audio industry, there are so many great companies, we can name them, like Oak Sound and, even like the largest companies. I work one of the largest companies.
I was going to say, Avid's a great example of success because people still use Pro Tools. I still use Pro Tools for my mixing. It's like my tried and true thing. It's my tried and true method for making good mixes. I mean,
the industry is still not like comparing to other industries. We are a relatively poor industry, right? And we don't like make like a shitload of money. And I think, the beauty is that, you can be more ambitious and build, another Avid, but you can have, passion to be like an indie developer who makes, cool plugins, also used by, amazing bands, like mix engineers, etc., and mastering engineers. But you know what I'm trying to say? There is no pressure to become the greatest. And that's why you are not so under such a big pressure to, to create the dark patterns, so this like a UX patterns that sort of keep you in the loop for, with the side, this ugly side effects, right? So I think I'm not sure if you would agree with me, right? But I think it's a great part of the music industry, right? That we are not, you have the choice, right? And there is this variety and like it's more like a lot of like small companies, not only, 3 major corporations. And with this said, I also want to ask you that one of the like last questions. Are you not afraid that this AI like a revolution will also like how to say, somehow get centralized into few major players, and will this can this somehow negatively impact the industry, right? So like a huge consolidation of like AI tools, what are your thoughts about this? What could potentially?
I think absolutely we need to be vigilant about this. I mean, look, if you think about if one company overly relied on AI generated data, it's most likely that they're not the only one. And we need to be on the lookout for that in the music industry, and to your point about how the music industry is really great because, you don't have to rely on the unicorn mentality. I think that we're seeing, dissonance in that because of companies like Suno that do follow the traditional VC model. And so they're, like some of the companies that I advise have been thinking about like, going the Suno route. And I'm like, well, are you trying to appeal to the generalist? Or are you trying to appeal to musicians and, like a more niche audience? And if you are, you need to sort of stick with stick with the more traditional route for the music industry. And so, going back to your point about, if major players adopt AI, almost to a fault, will that create, issues around the music industry? I think it could. And the reason I say could is because there are a lot of potentially, like, just look, think of it this way. There are a lot of positive and negative implications around AI. And I think that, let's like delve into the negatives for a second, right? It could, the moves that major labels are making right now could replace artists if we're not careful about this, if we're not making sure that, we can hold them accountable. And that means that, there needs to be more potentially communal action on the side of artists, action on the side of advocates, and, speakers such as you and me who have a voice and have a following in order to, advocate for the change that we want to see. If that doesn't happen, then I believe that AI really does have a chance of sort of taking over in a way that we don't want. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant of this in not just saying we want to throw away this technology. And the reason I say this is because part of the reason that it hasn't gone away is because there are a lot of people who use it. I've talked to a lot of people that ask me like, why do you talk about AI, or why is it still here? And, both of those questions lead to the same answer for me, because there are a lot of people that use it. The technology is advanced enough that it's not going away. We need to be able to make peace with it, and, not only make peace with it, but really tailor it to our needs. We need to remember that artificial intelligence is an assistive technology. It's supposed to be able to interact with us in a way that allows us as humans, as creators, as engineers, as product managers, as researchers, and just as consumers, to be able to properly enjoy our lives the way that we want to on our terms. And if that's not true for everybody, then there's a lot of work to be done. But I believe that the way to hold, these technologies accountable is to hold them accountable with a vision of what we actually want to see. You can't just say like, we want to travel back in time to, a time where there wasn't AI, because AI has been around in the research context since the 50s. So, you got to think about it with that context as well. I think that, the advice I often give, just like people who've seen panels and stuff, anyone who's seen me on stage before will be able to sort of advocate on this front. And basically, the advice I often give people is, think about what you want to see happening with this technology, right? Don't think about where it already is. Don't just think about the negative implications. Just think about what you want to see happen. Because if you don't have a vision for yourself, then you're not going to be able to achieve that, because it doesn't exist at the current moment.
Ricky, but you know what? I mean, Ricky, I believe, like with any other technology, personally, I'm not afraid of the technology itself. I'm more concerned with monopolies and, large players, I think like with everything else, technology is just a tool. I mean, this is actually obviously super sophisticated and cool tool. And I also use it, heavily. But I mean, I would just it's like a one of economy, right? I mean, if you take a macroeconomic course, first thing they teach you is just hey, the monopoly is bad for users, for consumers, because the entire thing is, that if you have a diversity and a lot of players competing with each other, then always have, there's always better solutions. You have choice, etc. But if everything is taken over by one major corporation and you have only social medium, Meta and whatever, then not only it's I don't want to go into a controversy about corporations, but then they don't have to pay so much attention because they are not under competitive pressure. So you no longer, they can treat you whatever they give you prices they want, right, and the features you want or no features. So that's I think one thing that concerns me when I see consolidation, companies being bought and acquired. I hope that it's not that this a diversity and a distribution of a large number of smaller and bigger companies will stay in the industry, right? Because this will be, then we can choose the tools. We can use RX, but you can use spectral layers. You can, and there's plenty of ROX. You have, Landry. You're not forced to use one specific solution, right? The only a Facebook of music, right, so to speak. Yeah,
I think that if you're thinking, if we're looking at it this way, there are certain things that you need to be cognizant of. The potential monopolies around corporations being, in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. That is really important to think about, because if we don't Yeah, it's truly a matter of like if we let them continue to, you know, build off of certain, you know, certain products and, you know, the audience that they already have. Yeah, you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head. That's creating a power vacuum because they're able to execute on whatever they want. I would say that, you know, the most important thing is at the current moment to be able to recognize this. And, you know, there is a choice on the side of consumers to use certain products that don't have the same implications on training data or, you know, training data, environmental impact, and other things like that. I think if I were to say a few things on, if I were to give a few points on this front, one is that despite what people may say, there is a choice on what tools to use. And, you know, if you want to implement new tools into your workflow. And I think that this really starts with doing the work on, you know, just doing the research on what actually makes sense for you based on ethics, based on ideology, based on, you know, the capability of that technology. Open source tools do exist in such a way that you don't necessarily need to have like the most complex coding background to be able to implement them. And they often have less of an impact on the factors that you're discussing. But on the other hand, you know, like in making these decisions, it's also about, I think another part of this is attention. You know, one thing that you sort of alluded to is that there's a lot of noise that monopolies are able to generate, you know, and like, as you were saying, as that's generated, it stifles growth because it's discouraging others from, you know, competing in the same space. So I believe the way to counter that is to give a voice or to give attention and new life in a way to smaller technologies or, you know, just like less known technologies in the space, less known models, less known products that are able to accomplish a job better than sort of what you might consider to be the standard products or models that are being used in the space. And I realize that might sound a little bit on the jargony side, but, you know, basically what I'm trying to say is as consumers and as, you know, as builders, we have a choice on what we can do. Even a small one can make a huge difference. And not just making that choice, but making these choices publicly known. Because in the same way that, you know, larger companies are able to push ads across television, we are able to push products by word of mouth.
Yep. Amen. True. Yeah. And the community, etc. So like if I know we have to like finish. I mean, can I like ask you one final question?
Of course.
You know, if you know, where do you see like the best business, you know, like a business models for AI that make sense to like a, you know, more into like a subscription or like a marketplace or, you know, some kind of APIs, you know, so what's, you know, what do you think is, you know, like a best, or like, again, it just depends on the product and the sense depends on the market.
I would say if I'm being totally honest, obviously it depends on the product, but if I were to give like my answer on like what the utopian scenario would be, it'd probably be an API. I think that, you know, a lot of products in the 2010s use some form of ML or AI in like an earlier sense of the term in order to accomplish their goals. And if we're able to work on that level, you know, of like, maybe it's not as visible to us, but it's able to accomplish like the goal of the product. I think that's the best way to have AI work as a collaborator. I think one of the issues with ChatGPT is that, you know, it's an issue, but it's also a good thing. It introduced, it just made AI, very accessible. And, you know, in some ways that causes the issues that we're discussing right now. But on the other hand, it also unmasks some of the underlying issues that we've been seeing in the consumer economy and just like, you know, the tech space for a while that just, you know, now need to be discussed because they're so prominent, you know, like the necessity of replacing certain constituents with AI, you know, as a worry around, you know, like workers' rights and musicians and all of that. It's something that, we need to determine based on, based on the patterns that we've seen. But, so in that way, like if AI is sort of in the shadows and, it's something that is implementable, but it's not necessarily something that everybody makes use of, but it's used as a co-pilot for people who need it. I think that's the best case scenario. And I think an API would accomplish that. Of course, at the same time, if people want to use it, I think that is absolutely their choice. And, my best case scenario is going to look different than somebody else's. I think that's also important to be aware of.
Absolutely. But you see, it's interesting you say that because, we had like a lot of conversations here, and that's all the chats, they have the problem, they just working in the browser you can obviously have access to the resources, but it's not working properly. You can use it in your terminal locally with access to all your files, but then, how can you synchronize it with browser so you can use it, so, it's obviously not the full sort of like a integration through API, but you can see it even on a very like a basic level. There is still so much that can be done in order to like integrate it a little bit better, right, into your workflow. So having some kind of like a cloud environment that you can work locally with machines and through networks and that that stuff, and I like to say even like integrated into other stuff. Yeah, that's just true.
Yeah. No, there are a few good examples. Wekinator being one where it can it uses ML to be able to. Wekinator's a program that can interact with peripherals like Max MSP. That's mainly a creative technology product, but it basically allows you to use ML to train your own instruments, basically. And I think that that's an example of something where AI is not necessarily the goal wasn't to make an AI product. It was to use AI to allow musicians and other artists and producers to be able to interact with their computer in a different way, but AI isn't necessarily in the foreground, it's in the background, just as a case in point.
Gotcha. Listen, Ricky, I would love to, I know you have to run, but I would love to, speak, for another hour or two. Thank you so much, for joining, we'll be in touch, of course. And we'll just for sure, our conversation gives me, another, proof that there is so much, first of all, great that you do education and you speak so much, so much about it, because I can see there is still so much to be done in terms of like education and like a spreading sort of, making the gap smaller between, business and technology, because it's still so new. And there is very hard, even when we talk, right, it's sometimes hard to find the common language, right? And
no, of course.
That's great that you're doing it. And I hope that we'll be able to put some other resources together for people. Yeah. So appreciate
absolutely.
You. Fun time.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And, I guess I would leave any listeners with this. Honestly, I still have a lot to learn myself. And I think that, if you're listening to this and you want to enter this field, I would highly encourage it. But just make sure to remember that it's never, ever too late to go back to the basics of what you know and use that as a starting point. Remember that everybody has something to learn. And you're going to find yourself scratching the surface, and you're going to find yourself needing to go back at certain points. Just don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty in the right spots.
Amen. I won't be either. Thank you so much, man. See you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. All right.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you liked it. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and of course on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to it and hit the bell, because we publish a lot of interesting videos there, not just the episodes. You can also become a supporter and get premium content like additional reading, unpublished videos on our Buy Me a Coffee page, linked in the description of this episode. See you in the next one. Yo.